everyone. My name is David McLeod, and I am your life mastery coach and author of the wonderful little book, A Life to Die For. I'm also one of the co-authors in the best-selling series, The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care. Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. This is episode 229, and our topic title today is From Trauma to Success. Now, beyond the glittering facade of accomplishments and accolades, there's a side to success that often goes unnoticed: the lingering effects of trauma. Contrary to popular belief, trauma isn't just about dramatic events. It's a complex force that shapes our decisions in relationships, defines our pursuit of success, and even sneaks into the way we navigate parenthood and careers. Trauma is sometimes hidden in plain sight. Even so, it has a powerful, if unconscious, effect on the course of our lives. Often misunderstood and shrouded in stigma, it affects a staggering number of people, with statistics indicating that 70% or so of Western adults report having encountered at least one traumatic event in their lifetimes. That's a pretty significant number. While society tends to associate trauma solely with extreme forms of abuse, usually physical or sexual in nature, its scope is far broader and its impact more pervasive than commonly acknowledged. This lack of understanding and awareness is particularly concerning among high achievers, leaders, and parents, as the influence of trauma often operates subtly behind the scenes, shaping our decisions in relationships, defining our concept of success, and influencing our roles as caregivers. So let's debunk the myth that success only thrives in the spotlight. It's time to shed some light on the whispers of trauma that influence our choices behind the scenes. My guest today is Dr. Toni Warner, a leader, educator, author, and speaker in the mental and spiritual health field for achievers, leaders, and parents. Having previously struggled with burnout, mental health, and toxic relationship patterns, her own challenging experiences led her to pursue what real life balance actually is and how to incorporate it successfully. Please welcome back the delightful Dr. Toni Warner. Okay, Toni, just bring on your camera. There you go. All right, and also make sure you're unmuted. Good. So welcome back, Dr. Toni. It's so great to have you again. It's been, I think, close to 3 years since the last time you came on my show. And so a lot has changed since then. And I know that for you, one of the things that has changed is that you've had an addition to your family, which of course is adding more stress in your life and also more love and excitement and everything else. So why don't you share a little bit about, first of all, what's going on in your life right now, and also what it is that has you so fired up about waking people up to this concept of trauma?
Sure. Well, I'm glad to be back. I didn't realize it's been 3 years. That has been quite a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So we just had our fourth. She is 10 months now. My middle two guys are just turned 6 and 10, and my oldest is almost 14, which I can't believe it. Now she's in high school. And I think, the biggest thing for me that I'm being reminded of since having my fourth is continuing to be really intentional with my time. When you have many things that you're passionate about, parenting, your profession, X, Y, and Z, advocacy, whatever it is that people are passionate about in their lives, those are some things that I'm passionate about in mine. They can't all take top priority 1000% of the time. And so we need to be intentional, right, about which pieces we're focusing on at any given time. And if we're not, I think that's when the stress can really take over, because we feel like we need to be everywhere all at once, and we can't be. We can't be. So that's been a big thing for me. And that connects to with why I'm so passionate about the work that I do. The conversation we're going to have today is one that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm someone who works with trauma, certified in working with trauma as a psychotherapist. I also work with trauma in different capacity as a mentor. But I myself have experienced trauma in my life, and it's not that kind of single incident, easy to understand trauma. It's that more complicated relational trauma that sometimes when you're in it and you've experienced it, you're like, oh no, like this isn't trauma. Like other people have it worse, or it doesn't fit the singular definition of what trauma is supposed to be. So there's so many kind of excuses that we can make up in our head because it doesn't make sense. And then at the same time, I've always been someone that's been an achiever. I've always been someone that's wanted to put my best foot forward, so to speak, right? And help others, do the best that I can. And when you have trauma that goes unprocessed, it often connects with this pressure, this need to achieve, and it can create an unhealthy dynamic. That doesn't mean that you can't achieve and you can't be successful in a healthy way. You certainly can. But oftentimes I see this in so many people's lives, and it creates this behind the scenes stress that causes a lot of challenges.
Right, right. So now you mentioned that you had some relational experiences that at first didn't feel like trauma to you while you were in them, but seemed to become more obvious that it was traumatic after the fact. Can you explain a little bit more about that so people can understand what it is you're talking about? I mean, I think we all have our own idea of what trauma is, but maybe we should start there and just kind of define it or make sure we're all talking about the same thing.
I think that's so important. And that's one of the parts I'm so passionate about, right? Is how do we define trauma? And we like to put things in a box so we can understand them, so we can categorize them. And there's a time and a place for that, right? Our brains work in a way that they can think really quickly and understand things really quickly when they're put in a box. But life isn't in a box, right? Like we can't understand all of life and all its complexities in a box. And I think that holds true when we talk about trauma. So when I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about an overwhelming experience or experiences that felt unsafe, unsupported, and unable to be escaped. The thing that a lot of people get tripped up on is the unsafe part. They're like, well, no one was beating me, right? Or no one had me blocked physically into a corner. So, like, of course I was safe. No, let's be real. Okay, let's be real about this. Feeling not safe to speak, feeling not safe to be who you are, feeling not safe to walk in your community because of the color of your skin, feeling not safe to express yourself because you feel so different, like the black sheep everywhere you go in your family or in your school or in your
Mhm.
community, right? Feeling unsafe to fail, feeling unsafe that you're not going to be good enough if you fail, if you mess up, if you disappoint. When you combine that sense of feeling unsafe beyond the physical, right? I'm talking about you are feeling internally like this is not safe for me to be me or to mess up. When you're feeling that and that's not being properly supported in a way that feels supportive for you, so you don't have internal and external resources, people in your life, in your environment to support you through that, and you feel like you have no choice, it's unescapable, there's nothing I can do about it, no matter how hard I try, it keeps, that feeling keeps coming back, or I can't get away from it, right?
Right.
When you have that experience, your nervous system is essentially in chronic stress mode, and that's encoded as trauma.
Got it. Yeah, that's actually a very good description. I appreciate your sharing that. Now, as a coach, I'm not a therapist, but as a coach, one of the things that I learn is if you're feeling unsafe, there's usually a story that has to do with some kind of fear. You're afraid of something, afraid of something. The unsafety is not really a feeling per se, but it's a story that you've made up. The world around me is not safe because this is going to happen or that is going to happen. And that, whatever this or that might be, is something that's going to potentially hurt me. And that's kind of where I see a lot of people coming into this. Okay, so they because they are afraid, because they believe that the world is unsafe, they tend to hold themselves back. They tend to try and find their little comfort zone and stay wrapped up in their little blankie or whatever, whether it's a physical blankie or just some kind of a psychological uh, protection scheme, and they develop these strategies, I guess, for avoiding putting themselves into positions where that sense of danger can manifest. That's kind of how I see it. And I agree with you that if it's not addressed, I mean, you can really damage yourself in a lot of ways by, you know, that belief gets so strong that you're afraid even to go out and go shopping for your groceries or something like that. Uh, Even when in reality, there's probably nothing to be afraid of, that doesn't stop what's going on up here or what's going on in the body as a result of what's going on in here. So I think that's a really interesting perspective that I hadn't thought about quite that way before. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And I think, I think this is also important is to have to hold space for that the truth that trauma is going to be experienced differently by different people, and different things will feel traumatic to different people, in part because of what you said, that it's people's perceptions of an experience are filtered through their own individual lenses, right? And that's
Right.
very unique to each of us. And so something could feel traumatic to me and not feel traumatic to you, and vice versa. That doesn't mean that that experience wasn't traumatic. And I think we can sometimes nullify what someone else's experience is, intentionally or unintentionally, because we don't get it. And that makes this conversation difficult to have, because
Right.
yes, in part, um, we create a story in our head, and they feed into our beliefs, and we strengthen that as we believe it more and more and more. But also that fear came from somewhere. Like it
Of course.
didn't
Yeah.
get created in a vacuum, right? And so it came from real experiences that we had
Mm.
evidence, that now that evidence may have become exacerbated over time or not. It could have been real intense, right? In that moment. And so we have evidence in our experience in life that this is true. This is not, to someone that's in it and really feeling it, whether they realize it or not, that fear, um, it feels real. It feels true, and it is connected to a real and true experience,
Of course. Yeah.
right, from their past. And so that's why we want to be able to both take, at some point, take ownership and accountability for the truth that really we're the only ones that can do our own internal healing. And also, we don't want to minimize or nullify the experience that we had that contributed, right, to that formation of that fear. Because I have, the amount of stories that I've heard over the 15 years that I've been in my field, there's real evidence for why someone would feel scared, right? Myself included. If every time I speak up or disagree, I get blasted, um, and I feel like I have no support through that, and there's no way out of it, that becomes a traumatizing
Sure.
relationship for me, a traumatizing experience, right? And
Yeah.
it feels like I can't do anything about this. It's challenging. It's really challenging, and it can mask itself in different ways. So if you're someone that really prides yourself on success, well, maybe your fear isn't so obvious, right?
Mm.
Maybe the fear is more so messing up at work, or not achieving the milestones in your business, or not hitting that promotion, or not excelling in X, Y, or Z, in your career, right? Because if you don't hit it in that amount of time, then you're either maybe you're not proving what you need to prove. You're not able to gain the power that you feel like you need to gain in order to feel like you have some semblance of control, which never lasts long anyway. Or you feel like you're not pleasing someone, right? Like, so I there's three P's that I think are good to remember. So there's a P's or please, and then there's power, so gaining power, and then there's proving. And so oftentimes those are three things that we find ourselves trying to do. We're trying to prove,
Right.
and that comes from this fear energy that's often connected to trauma that we don't realize is trauma for us,
Right. Right.
right? When
Yeah,
we
I think a lot of this goes into our subconscious or our unconscious, depending on your perspective. And you mentioned about getting blasted for speaking up, and I know I had a similar experience when I was a kid. I didn't get blasted so much, but my mom would often look at me in a certain way and say, "Oh, don't be ridiculous," or "Where do you get such silly ideas?" Now, that doesn't sound like a traumatic experience by any stretch of the imagination. But when this is coming from from someone in your life who you look up to, who is a person in authority, you begin to, let me rephrase that. I began to take this on as there's something wrong with me because I have these ideas. I am broken. I am defective. I'm stupid. Even though none of those things were true, and it was just my mom getting triggered about something at the time when this was happening to me, I couldn't possibly understand what was going on for her. I was only experiencing what was going on for me. So this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, and they carry that right through into their adult lives, and they continue with whatever coping strategies they come up with because they worked back when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. But those strategies don't work anymore. And this is part of the work that I do. It's all about uncovering the shadow, getting into the shadow, and finding out where did that belief come from, you know? And it sounds like you're doing the same kind of work, although I know you're working more as a psychotherapist now and not so much as a coach. I guess you've made a transition in your business or something, but we can talk about that too if you like. Before I hand over the microphone to you, I just wanted to welcome Kate to the audience and say thank you for being here, and to you and anyone else who shows up. If you have questions or comments, please just put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to address those before the show is over. Anyway, I'm sorry. Did you kind of resonate or whatever with what I was saying?
I like the example that you shared because I think that absolutely can become encoded as trauma if your system, your experience of feeling like there was like a deficit with you, there was something wrong with you, when you internalize that, and then it becomes a basis of fear where I can't fully express myself, I can't fully be myself, and that is happening in your system, your cortisol levels are increasing, right, in your system, then what's happening is that your body was not able to process that fear, was not able to process that trauma, and so it is still there, it is still existing, and so that means that you were not able to cope properly in a way that's processes it. In the moment, you may have been able to cope to get through it, but I'm talking about, let's use a different word, instead of coping to get through it, healing and processing it, right? So being able to feel it and move through it is different than coping through the moment, but then it's still being there.
Right.
To be dealt with.
Well, and it's amazing to me when I work with people, how many of them revert back to a childhood incident, just like the one I described. It doesn't sound massive, as you say, but because it was internalized as negative energy that I kind of brought to myself, right? My mom didn't say you're not worthy. My mom didn't say you're broken. My mom didn't say you're an idiot, but she did say things that led me to conclude those things myself. And I know she wasn't doing it because she was, mean or nasty or a horrible person or anything like that. And even though I may build up this story that my mom is an evil witch or something like that over the course of time, and it takes, it's a buildup of energy. So by the time I get into my adult life and I start finally addressing this, and I'm in a place where I can release that energy, what comes out is all the hatred I have towards my mom that I have built up over the years because of a few things that she said during her lifetime. And believe me, my mom was not a nasty person, right? I'm just saying this happens to all of us. We all have different experiences in childhood, but ultimately our parents are in their own way trying to help us to grow into decent human beings. And that way that they have might be a dysfunctional way. It might be a very dysfunctional way, but that doesn't mean that they're doing it deliberately. Most parents, I think, are actually quite loving of their kids. Most parents really just want the best for them. There are a few weirdos out there, absolutely, and some that are absolutely destructive of their kids, no question about it. But I think that generally speaking, we can say that most parents are just doing the best they can with the minimum tools that they have?
Oh, it's so complex because I do believe that, parents want the best, generally speaking, no matter who they are, where they're at in their life, they want the best for their children. And also we just all are exposed. So I'm a parent, you're a parent. We're all exposed to different levels of awareness and skills about what parenting is. Our cultures have different ideas about what parenting is. And so the way that can play out is just going to look different for each of us.
Yep.
But that's still going to have an effect on our children, right? And so we aren't even if we're able to try to do the best that we can all of the time, we're still not going to be a perfect parent, right? We're just not. It doesn't exist. It's not possible. And I think that we need some space for that, because this is something that some people put pressure on themselves to be successful with too, is let me just do as much as I possibly can in order to be the perfect parent. And then that would be considered success. Other people do this in their work life, let me just do everything I possibly can and overextend myself and push myself really hard on my work life. And then that will be considered success. But there is something beneath that pressure, that need to push yourself so hard. And that is what we want to examine, because that is what's often connected to some kind of experience of trauma. And trauma is a spectrum. It is not going to be, oh, this is trauma, so if your experience doesn't fit into this, then that's not traumatic. No, if you have internalized that there is no space for you to be yourself in this world, or to not be perfect, or to fail, or you're not allowed to fail, or you can't disappoint anybody, if you have internalized that so deeply that your nervous system feels fear when the possible prospect of that comes up, and you don't have the internal resources to support yourself, and you feel like there's no choice and there's no way out of it, then that is a traumatic experience that you're having right now that is coming up for you from whatever it was that you experienced in your past, right? And I'm kind of keep coming back to that, because there's no shame in that. There's no shame in noticing that this is the case. In fact, David, you shared, I think you said like 75% or something like that. That's a stat that I gave you, who have experienced or been exposed to at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. In the United States, it's even higher. It's above 80%. It's around 82%.
Well, I think if we look at the definition of trauma, the way you have shaped it here today, I think we could say that virtually everyone has experienced that.
That's my belief. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I see Kate just put a comment in. I'm just going to share this quickly here so you can hear what she said. Thank you for the welcome. I joined in because I've only recently discovered that I had experienced a fair amount of trauma as a child and teenager. As a result, I'm beginning to understand the difficulties I've experienced in recent years navigating emotions I'd never experienced or recognized over all the previous successful decades. Wanting to piece together a story that makes sense to me. Still feels as though I haven't got to the end of the story, because I've not yet got through the journey. Well, thank you for sharing that, Kate. I appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty there. What would you say to Kate on that one, Toni?
I agree. Thank you for sharing that, Kate. This is, I would say this is not an uncommon experience, because what can happen, especially if you resonate with being an achiever, in some way, you use the word successful decades, so if you resonate with that at all, you found a way to, in those previous decades, get through, right? You found a way to function. And so that can make us believe that we've kind of got it all figured out, or make us believe that we're all good, or that whatever happened didn't affect us, or maybe we don't even remember some of the experiences that we had, because we're so in life of busy, of go, of do, of but, right? We're so keeping ourselves essentially distracted by pushing for success, or whatever it is that you are focusing on, that there's not the space for that experience to come up. Now, it does come, but you're pushing it down, right? We push it down with the distraction of our busy lives, of our need to be successful, of our need to get things done, of our need to X, Y, and Z. I did this too. I was addicted to action and I had no idea. I didn't realize that was what was going on, but I was addicted to action. I could not stop being in action. I was go, 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 do, push, push, push all the time, right? And so everyone thought I was all good, all gravy all the time until at some point we have a threshold. We have a threshold. Now, we had been getting subtle signs throughout, but because we're really good at ignoring those and pushing through, we didn't stop to pay attention to those subtle signs, right? So you might get fatigued sometimes. You're like, oh, no, I'm not going to rest, or whatever your subtle signs were. So I had subtle signs too, but I didn't have time for that. I'm going to keep pushing through, right? Until we hit a threshold where the signs aren't going to be subtle anymore.
It becomes a warning shot to the temple.
It is, because it didn't go away.
Right.
It got pushed down. It got avoided. It got put in a place, in a box, compartmentalized so that you could push through until you got to this place where you're at now. Whatever that brick was for you, for me, it was a really devastating breakup with someone that I thought I was going to be with, and a couple other things that happened at the same time. And so I wound up being hospitalized. And this was back when I was in college, right? And so bit by bit by bit, then some of my past experiences came back up for me to either choose to begin to look at and process and heal, or choose to try to push back down again. And I'll tell you the truth, Kate, I did a little bit of both for a long time, right? It's not like a smooth sailing ride just forevermore, right? Just because that brick hit us and now we're like, okay, we're looking at you, we see you, right? It's time to work with that. And so I just want to share my compassion for you, because it takes such courage to maneuver at that place. When that threshold has been hit, after really pushing yourself to say, like, I have no threshold. Like, my threshold is really high. I can keep on trucking, right? And then you feel like something has happened, and maybe you can put words to that something. Maybe you can't. For a lot of people, COVID was that something. But then it comes up and it can't be avoided anymore. And little by little by little, you get to make the choice. Right here, right now, am I going to see what I can do to heal this, to just recognize this, to just be with this, to just acknowledge this? And it's helpful to have someone that you trust, because remember, we didn't feel a sense of safety, a sense of adequate support, or this ability to have choice, right? So it's inescapable. So we need those three things in the process of healing. We need to experience a sense of safety. We need to experience a sense of support. We need to experience a sense of, I have choice. I have some autonomy in this, right? But it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, I'll be healing forevermore. Like, I'm dedicated to my healing journey forevermore. And I believe that I'll probably have healing to do forevermore, because I'm just going to keep living life, right?
Exactly.
And so wherever you're at on your journey, just know it's not going to happen overnight, and that's normal. Like, that's okay. That's expected. A healing journey happens in a healthy way when it is kind of, there's an ebb and flow to it. Right?
That was beautiful. I think there's a lot there that you said that I think is really, really important. And the first thing that I would like to tell people is the whole thing is a process. You know, you're not just going to snap your fingers or take a pill and suddenly everything's going to be all magically. Life doesn't work that way. It is a process. And so in order to facilitate the process, you may need to go through multiple different steps before you get to that place where you can actually unload everything and heal yourself, like in one big giant quantum leap. You're not going to get to that quantum leap place until you reach a point where you're ready for that. So one of the things I know for myself is I did a lot of dabbling in personal growth work, different things. I tried this and that and the other thing. Some appealed to me, some of them, yeah, I just really wasn't feeling right about them. But one thing I did learn from pretty much all of those, even those little dabbles, was just by sitting down and either writing in a journal or meditating and allowing myself to just feel in my body what was going on, those tiny little steps allowed me to start moving closer and closer to that quantum leap. And the quantum leap came for me in 2003, like 7 years after I started that journey. Now, it's going to take more or less time for you. We're all different. We all have our own process to go through. But that quantum leap doesn't mean I was suddenly healed. What it meant was I was able to unload a lot of the stuff that, as Toni had said, that I stored in the boxes somewhere around my body someplace. I was able to open those boxes and just let it out. Now, did it all come out? Probably not, but most of it did. And that huge relief, the huge release of that energy opened up the space for love and compassion and gratitude and everything else to start coming into my life. And that is where my real healing started. Now, I shouldn't say that. That sounds like I had to wait until I got to the quantum leap before the healing happened. That's not really true. Every one of those tiny little steps was a healing step. Okay, so my invitation to you is find something that works for you just to get yourself started and acknowledging who you are, honoring who you are. It might be something simple like meditation. It might be something like yoga. It might be something like taking up painting or something. Anything to just start expressing what's inside you in a form that only you need to see. No one else needs to see it. You can share it if you want, but you don't have to. That's the beauty of the process. You can learn things about yourself, and you can start that healing journey one step at a time.
Yeah. It's absolutely a journey. And I just want to again say there's no shame in that. There's no shame in it being a journey. It's intended to be a journey. And there's a reason or reasons why this particular part of your journey is beginning now as opposed to at a different time in your past. And that can sometimes feel frustrating to hear, why now, right?
Well, but look, I for myself, just to put things in perspective, I probably spent the first 40 years of my life avoiding that journey. And it was only maybe 10 years of actually going through healing process and now actually enjoying the later part of my life. Now, that doesn't mean to say my healing is done. I'm still doing it. I still have triggers that come up. I still get upset with people, and my ego mind's still quite active. But I spend more time in my heart and my soul now than I ever did back when I was in my 40s, up to my 40s. So Kate just said, thank you. So true. I felt pulled by a vision during that time. Now have a new vision, new purpose, and discovered that I couldn't promote myself. Oh, interesting. After decades of feeling confident, brave, outspoken, I suddenly realized that I didn't feel confident, worthy, deserving, plus a lack of interest in building my own business. The only emotion allowed when growing up was happiness, so the more challenging emotions were all buried. Pretty deep, obviously. Yeah, I hear you both. Even what you were saying when I joined made sense. Thank you for this interesting discussion. Well, you're most welcome, Kate, and thank you for sharing from your heart. I appreciate that. As we've been saying, it's a journey. So, Dr. Toni, let's talk a little bit now about what we can do to ease the burden of this old trauma that we might not be fully aware of. How do you recommend to people to become more aware of it and then to begin the healing process?
I think the first step is to do what we're doing now, and that's to be open to have conversations about it or to listen to conversations about it, because that is going to help us reduce some of the stigma and some of the rigidity of the category of what trauma is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
When we can do some of that, then we can open up some space and some grace for ourselves to say, okay, maybe I do have some trauma experiences that I've got buried. Maybe I do. Just starting there is enough, because it can feel scary to say that. It can feel scary, right? If you're someone who prides yourself on being driven, ambitious, successful, being an achiever, right? Like admitting that there's this vulnerability can be a really scary thing. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that I have learned, and there are many, but this is one of them, is that vulnerability is so freaking courageous. Like, being able to be vulnerable in a way that allows us to honor all the different pieces of ourselves, not have to put on a particular front in order to prove or please or whatever the case is, but really being able to vulnerably embrace and see and honor all of the pieces of ourselves. It changes the way we love ourselves, the way we forgive ourselves, the way we treat ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves, our expectation of ourselves. And that gets mirrored out. That gets projected out then into our relationships, our judgments, our interactions with others. And the
Yeah.
ripple effect of that isn't just healing for us as individuals. It can become healing and inspiring for others who are just observing us,
That's right. Yeah.
right?
And that, I just want to really amplify that statement. I can tell you that in my own healing journey, one of the things that healed me more than anything was watching other people having the willingness, the courage, the vulnerability to share their story. It made it possible for me to realize, wow, nobody is judging these people. If I share, maybe they won't judge me either. It allowed me to kind of let go of that fear a little bit and start stepping into the truth of who I am. That's one of the best things around. Witness other people and be there to support them energetically as they go through their journey. That's just amazing. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can be really powerful. And I think we can easily get into a habit of compare and despair, right? So we see someone else like, oh, they did that or whatever the case is. So why can't I? And
Right.
so I like to shift that into compare and inspire, right? So if you're comparing yourself and you're not feeling inspired, it's time to step back. Right, if we get caught in compare and despair, can actually make that trauma experience feel much more shameful, much more blameful, much more challenging to navigate. But if we're able to step a little bit into compare and inspire, it's like what you were just saying, David, right? It's just there's a part of you that has this hope and belief in knowing that healing is possible, that connects with
Mhm.
that resonates with that. And you can feel that within yourself. But if you aren't used to feeling anything within yourself because you maybe were addicted to action like me, or you numbed out your emotions, or whatever the case is, then it's a learning process to
Right.
begin to notice how you feel and be able to gradually feel that and allow yourself to feel that a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and I think that this really does boil down to understanding, knowing the deepest truth about who I really am. It's not because many of us live our lives trying to appear the way we expect everyone to, the way we believe everyone expects us to be. That's
Mm,
how a lot of us live our lives. And we try to take on these masks and costumes and so forth so that we can appear like the joker in the back of the room, or the very serious one who always speaks the truth, or whatever little archetypal image you'd like to create for yourself. We all find a way to show up in the world that isn't necessarily true to who we really are. And we do that as a way of surviving, as a way of making our way through life. And the problem is, when you see someone else posturing in that way, you immediately know how fake it is. You know that they're not being themselves. So how can you not realize that maybe by doing it yourself, you're kind of, they know that you're a fake too. So why not just get down, take off all these masks and say, no, that's not really who I am. That's not really who I am. Who I really am is this. And this is how I want people to see me. This is how I want people to experience me. If you are willing to go there and then just trust that who you really are is an amazing, divine, magnificent, spiritual being of light and love, if you can trust that and just bring it forth, without apology, people will accept that. People will respond to that. And that's really what is so amazing about it. We spent all this time trying to trick people into liking us when all we had to do was show up as who we really are. That's the amazing thing about it. And vulnerability is a big part of that.
It is, because there's a component of this that I think can be challenging, because it's like, well, if I've been living my life this way for so long, what do you mean like I'm someone else? Like this is who I know myself to be, right? Like it can be confusing. It's like, this, who am I then? And then that can be an event, a venture in and of itself. Kate's kind of speaking to that in her message. She said, yes, I'm learning to love, honor, and respect myself through this journey of learning how to promote myself. Learning about who I am now has been the confusing part, and getting there slowly. And I think that part of that is also asking ourselves, who and how do I want to be? Who and how do I desire to be? Like, who and how do I really value at my core being in this world? And I ask myself that question, right? I talk about that in my book too. I ask myself that question quite often. And that is so grounding, because maybe if in the moment it's confusing to say, I don't know, like, who am I really? To ask ourselves, well, who and how do I want to be? Who and how do I actually, in my core, value being in this lifetime, in this world? I think that can be really grounding for us. And it can be a good starting place if you're kind of still in this, it seems kind of all over the place, very gray, as far as like, well, I don't know who I really am, but I want to know, right? If you're kind of in that place, this might be a question to ask yourself, and your answer will shift. It'll change over time. That's a good thing. That means you're getting to know yourself more and more and more, right? But just to begin to have that dialogue with yourself is really powerful. I just did that with myself just the other week. I was writing journaling about that with myself, and it was so centering and so grounding. And I've been doing it for years now, right? And so it's something that we can all do if this question is there of, well, who am I really, or who do I want to be right now?
Yeah, I've got two processes that I share with people. One is the repeated question game, which is very much just a very simple case of me sitting in front of you and saying, okay, who are you? And then having you answer with whatever is true in this moment. And we do this repeatedly for, 10 minutes or so. And you'd be amazed at how the answers shift and move just in that 10-minute time frame. And what I find is anytime I do this with someone, the person who's on the receiving end of that repeated question just has so many awarenesses showing up about how many amazing attributes that he or she has that are just way beyond what they believed 10 minutes earlier. It's a powerful, powerful process. And then to your idea of who or how do I want to be, I have another process called conscious self-creation, which is actually a several day course that I teach. It's an online thing, and it goes through exactly that thing. Well, before you can figure out who you want to be, you better have some sense of who you are right now, or how you're showing up right now. And now you can start, playing little games with yourself. And it's like, for me, being a musician, having a little mixer in front of me, and I say, well, if I turn this up a little bit, that will create a louder sense of reverb or something like that. And that'll give us a slightly different appearance of the essence of who I am. You see, you can play with all these little attributes. It's fun. And why shouldn't it be fun? I mean, life should be just a barrel of laughs, don't you think?
Fun is such a main component of life. I don't think that everything can be fun all of the time, because I think we have to have other
Oh,
experiences in order for fun
that's
to
right.
be appreciated. But I do think that we undervalue the power of fun and the purpose of fun, in our lives, in our society, in our culture in general. And when we're pushing ourselves for success, that is definitely one of the things I see happen time and time again, right? All
Yeah.
the time for fun. Right? It's a
Well,
luxury.
speaking of fun, just think about some of the great comedians who have been on stage, and the way they can create laughter even out of very tragic circumstances. And I think that says a huge amount about our essence as human beings. You know, we recognize something in that laughter. We're not laughing at the people who suffered in the tragic event. We are allowing ourselves to heal in a way that allows us to bring laughter into the world as a result of that tragic event. It's a very different perspective, you know? And you can tell when a comedian is respectfully bringing laughter about a situation versus someone who is making fun of something. You know, you have a different reaction depending on those two kinds of situations. So we can certainly laugh and enjoy even some of the darkest parts of our lives if we choose to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It says, I always felt that I was absolutely open, honest, authentic, also trained with punitive measures to be like that, and expected that everyone was the same. Also, never allowed to celebrate my successes while growing up, so never saw myself as anyone special. My successes were a result of loving that I was doing, yet saw the success as a result of what I was doing, not that I was so special doing it. And so there was this almost like innate pressure, right? Kind of put
Mm-hmm.
on you, Kate, that you were expected to succeed. I can resonate with that. I share again some of that in my book too. I think if you want
Well,
to
why
check
don't
that,
now you've mentioned your book twice. Bring it up here so we can see the title and the front cover.
it's called
Okay,
The
The
Reset,
Reset.
a high
A high
achiever's.
achiever's guide to freedom and fulfillment.
Yes.
Beautiful. Is that a recent book?
It came out last year, yeah. So this is your step-by-step roadmap for getting unstuck. And it's by no means am I saying this is trauma therapy or trauma healing. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that some of the small steps we can take on our own, some of what we're talking about here, David, this is one way to begin, right? Because it actually allows you to personalize your experience. There's space you can see for you to make it your own.
Right.
So that's in there, and there's a lot of what you're talking about, Kate, inside of that.
Well, beautiful. So why don't you grab a link? I assume that's available on Amazon or someplace like that. So why don't you grab a link and drop that into the chat so people can get that? Yeah, this idea of finding a path to healing, I think, is really, really important. Um, we've talked a little bit about a few things that we can do just to get started, you know, such as meditating or journaling or, you know, doing artwork or whatever. Um, do you have some other ideas about specific steps that people can take to get to their own path of healing?
It really depends on where you're at in your journey. So I think that as subtle as this sounds, I really do think that just beginning to have conversations, whether it's with yourself, with other people about it, I think is really important. Because if you're at a place where there's a lack of openness or willingness to even entertain the idea that maybe there is some pain, that maybe there is some fear that's inside,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't work with it, right? Like we can't work with it unless we can get to the place where there's at least a little bit of openness to say, okay, there is some pain and fear there that I would like to work with. You don't need to know how to work with it yet, because honestly, the how unveils itself over time anyway. It's not a how and then, it's not like a light switch. Here's how, done.
All
It's
right.
not like that. So we try to go straight to the how often when we are achievers and really focus on success. But the how is not the first place to start. The how is not the first place to start here. So if instead we could just begin to practice being open to the idea that maybe there's some pain, maybe there's some hurt, maybe there's some fear that is operating in the background, and that we would like to begin to work with that we would like to begin at least to acknowledge that it's there. That honestly, it sounds so small and subtle, but it makes such a big difference because it opens the door.
Yeah, beautiful. And so I assume that you are available for anybody who would like to maybe learn a little bit more about this. Do you have a separate link for like a sign up place they could go to maybe sign up for a free session or some kind of thing like that?
So I offer a high level mentorship, and that's for self development and leadership development for professionals and parents. And then speaking engagements and things like that. And then separate from that is the psychotherapy. They're two completely separate offerings. But if you go to drtoniwarner.com, I did put that in the chat, drtoniwarner.com. What you'll find there are a couple things that are completely free for you to access. There's a free Q&A submission form there. So you can submit a question to me directly that you have related to this or any other things that it's pulled up for you. And I'll actually anonymously answer your question through a video that I'll put on YouTube so that not just you benefit from that answer, but someone else out there has that question too, right? And so other people can benefit from the answer as well.
I
There's
like that
free,
idea. Yeah.
yeah, because I can't offer, free sessions to everyone. That's not something that I have available, to myself, but I absolutely can offer free support in different ways. And then my YouTube channel in and of itself, if you subscribe to that, it's Bold and Balanced with Dr. Toni. I put out a variety of different vlog series that are just real raw about embracing our multifaceted self, as well as conversations much like you and I are having today, David, to help us go deeper, to challenge ourselves and or to feel inspired along our healing journey. So
Yeah.
those resources are on drtoniwarner.com.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, the idea of healing, as we both have said in this conversation, I've said many times before, and I'm sure other people have as well. Healing is not necessarily a one and done kind of process. You're going to, I mean, sure, you have a wound in your body and it heals, but when we're talking about this kind of energetic healing, it may be an ongoing thing. It may be something that you have to keep working on for maybe for the rest of your life. Uh, some people have talked about working on certain issues even in multiple lifetimes, and that's amazing. And I think that's really what our whole life is all about anyway. It's about, I believe, this is my own personal belief, you can agree or disagree. My belief is that the ultimate purpose of life is to help me acknowledge, embrace, and just simply envelop the full, complete truth of who I really am. And
Hmm.
and and the journey is really about maybe discovering who I am not to begin with. and and how can I do that? Well, by trying things out that don't necessarily resonate with the truth of who I am. And we've all done that. Like I said, everybody's done that. We all go through different aspects of our lives, and some of us go through a very long period of time before we start that wake up process. Some of us come into this world already well on the path of waking up, and it's amazing really when you think about all the different amazing people on this planet and all the stuff that they're doing. It's really, though, the ultimate goal is to know with absolute certainty the truth of who I really am. That's what I believe is the ultimate truth of life.
Would you like me to share my purpose of life?
Sure.
I have it typed out, printed, and put on my wall, so I'll read it to you.
Okay.
So, the purpose of life is to meaningfully connect, contribute, and create through both individual and collective experience with as much passion, joy, love, compassion, and purpose as possible in any given moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those are compatible statements, by the way. They are worded differently, but I think ultimately they're completely compatible. So I think it's beautiful that we have two different ways of sharing the same message, uh, and a message, I believe, of great hope and joy. Because I mean, how can you experience joy and really embrace it if you haven't also experienced some of the opposite? The complete lack of joy, the fear, the pain. Maybe we need to go through that traumatic stuff in order to be able to get to the place of really appreciating what we do have and who we really are.
And it's just never done. And that can be a hard pill to swallow when we like to get things done, right?
That's right.
It's never done. It's a journey upon a journey upon a journey upon a journey, which is why the journey is what matters, right? Because it's a journey and a journey
Yeah.
where it's never done. We never get to the end point in any given lifetime. It's constant expansion, constant evolution. It's infinite. And I think that sometimes because we want to get things done, that can feel frustrating, can feel anger invoking, it that can feel a whole array of challenging emotions. But I think it's beautiful if we rest into that, because that means that we don't have to have that pressure to get it done all of the time.
Right.
It's okay if we allow ourselves to enjoy the journey sometimes.
Right. All right. So we've talked a lot about trauma and path to healing and all kinds of different things. Let's just now to wrap this up and tie a bow around it. Let's talk a little bit about success. How does that look?
Well, I think success is about living a life well lived, again, in any given moment. And instead, what we have gotten warped, I mean, success is not something we're going to be able to fully wrap around in a couple minutes. But what I'll say is there's so much in our society, in our culture, different genders experience different pressures around success, about external success. It's so externally focused and it's so goal, goal, goal. There is nothing wrong at all with having goals. I think goals can be really great, but goals are not the purpose. They're not the purpose. And when we attach our push, our addiction to action, right? Like I had shared that I experienced, to that being the only kind of qualifier for what it means to be successful. First of all, we never actually achieve success, because once we hit one goal, then there's another one, and then there's another one, and then there's another one, and it feels completely unfulfilling, right? But also, there's no way to just there's no way to make it happen. It feels so stressful, and
Right.
yet we keep pushing anyway. And so I feel incredibly passionate that we need to redefine success, and in so doing, that is so connected to trauma experiences individually and collectively that we have as a society. Because when we push ourselves so often so hard to no avail, we are not caring for ourselves, we're not able to fully care for others in the way that we are desiring or are meant to, right? We need to redefine success. To me, it's
Well, then,
about,
so then how would you redefine success? I
to me,
know
it's
I
about,
have a very short definition, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
to me, honestly, it's about, I think the most basic way for me to say is that it's about living a life well lived in any given moment. In this moment, do I feel that I am living a life well lived right here, right now?
That's
And
right.
just keep asking ourselves that. If you can feel that way in the moments more often than not, doesn't that feel a sense of internal fulfillment, which to me is success?
I think that's really good. You hit on a key word there, and that is fulfillment. And I think that for me, success is correlated exactly with how much gratitude I feel about my life.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter how much money I have or any of that other stuff, any of those accoutrements or accomplishments or goals that I've achieved. Those make no difference whatsoever. The question is, am I happy with my life? Am I happy with who I am? And if I am, then what happens is I tend to continue showing up in that way, and I will simply express who I am by doing programs like this, by writing books, by writing poetry, by doing music. Those are little beautiful manifestations of an expression of David. You have your own way of expressing who you are. And so the things that you do really are manifestations of your true essence rather than um, defining who you are. This is really important for us to understand. There's a big difference there. So if you can just stand in gratitude and fulfillment for all of who you are, to me, that is success. That is a life well lived.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time here, Toni. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate your being here. before I wrap it up here, would you like to take a couple of minutes and just share your final thoughts on this topic?
I think a good question for all of us to ask ourselves, whether you're wondering if there's some trauma for you to begin to heal or continue to heal or not, maybe a good question for us to ask ourselves is, am I focused on what I'm doing, or am I focused on why I'm doing it? And that can be a really clarifying question, both with regard to how we're defining success in our life, as well as what the motivating factors are behind it, and whether or not it might be connected to trauma and fear and pain and things like that underneath that might need to be tended to. And the answer might vary moment to moment. That's okay. Keep asking it.
That's right. Bask in the glory of the question. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Toni. It's been just a real pleasure having you here, and I really have enjoyed this conversation. I'd like to remind everybody that, in the pursuit of a meaningful and fulfilling life, it's imperative to recognize the prevalence of trauma, its diverse manifestations, and its power to shape your understanding of success. Intentional healing helps you to expand your comprehension of trauma, destigmatize its effects, and initiate a transformation toward redefining success, nurturing healing, and fostering compassion and empathy everywhere. So I want to thank you all for watching today's program. And remember, you can catch the recordings of this and every other episode on my website at lifemasterytv.com. And finally, I'd just like to invite you to remember to practice my life mastery mantra every day. Real simple. It goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So until we meet again, I'm David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. I'll see you next time on Life Mastery TV. Bye-bye.